So, Nina, Simon, welcome to the Photographic Life podcast. A special episode talking to you about your most recent project. Um, I suppose, really, for me, one of the reasons for asking you to join us is because it's happening in Brighton on the south coast of England, a town I know a lot about. I've lived there since the 1980s to the 1990s and very aware of what's been going on there over the years photographically. And I think that you're dealing with a number of themes that come up on the podcast quite a lot, primarily those around taking control and the idea also of using spaces that with companies going out of business, shops going out of business. I know you, Simon, have used shops as well as exhibition spaces. So all of that kind of stuff made me think, I think we should have a conversation. So, Simon, because I picked it up off your social media and you're very strong on social media, where did this all come from? What was the instigation?
Can I just preempt this by saying that we're not taking back control? Yeah, yeah, we're not going to leave campaign. We very much remain.
Well,
We're going to remain in Brighton. We're not going to be pushed out by
no, but there is a
rising
sense of,
rents.
there's a sense there of, well, this, I mean, that's the really interesting thing because when I arrived in Brighton in '89, I lived right in the very centre. Bobby Gillespie lived just down the road from me. Morcheeba were making an album round the corner. You know, there was all these things going on because everybody lived in squats at the
Yeah.
time. And over the years, the I suppose the monification of Brighton has actually had a big impact, hasn't it, on being a creative and living in Brighton?
Mm. It has. I mean, I have to say, on the positive side first, Brighton has remained as it has maintained a sense of independence in the sense that you walk around the North Lanes and 90% of the shops will be privately owned. They're not kind of brands. They're not, it hasn't become the homogenous high street, not to say we still got the kind of shopping centre, but the heart of Brighton still does have that element of independence. And should I could also say grunginess because it is still a bit dirty here. It's probably not
Well,
quite as dirty as when you were here.
it's still, I mean, it's still got that sense of anarchy. I have to say, my middle daughter still lives in Kemptown, so yeah, I'm aware of how it is. But it has still changed a lot, hasn't
Oh
it?
yeah, no doubt. And yes, the prices have had a big impact on that, particularly in terms of housing. You can't live in the center of Brighton or even kind of Central Hove now without dropping, a fair whack. But partly just because of how the economics of cities work, particularly in the southeast, but also COVID had a big impact. A lot of people started looking to kind of get out of Brighton, get out of London, and move down here. So that's also had an impact. And there isn't the social demographics of housing. In the sense that a lot more people need, one person ownership means that it's very difficult here because there's nowhere to build. This is one of the main problems that Brighton's always had, particularly within the arts, is that there is nowhere to build a new art centre really on the scale of Turner Contemporary or um, uh, Bexhill, Delaware Pavilion, Hastings Contemporary. So that's been an issue. And more and more young, particularly younger artists, graduate and then have to move out, whether that be back home or along the coast, Portslade, towards Worthing and now over to New Haven. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's good kind of that there is some of these kind of outer areas of the south of Brighton are starting to regenerate, but it's got to be not at the cost of everybody of a kind of creative brain drain from the city, particularly when the creative industries are one of, if not the most significant industries for growth of the city.
Well, I mean, this is something not just Brighton, but this is something that's happening all over the world, isn't it? I mean, artists have always traditionally, whether it was in Soho in New York, they're getting pushed out of certain areas. when other people come in. So, Nina, what was the idea? What was the impetus for this project that you're particularly involved in?
Well, it's been on my radar a long time to try to obtain a space. I also run a social enterprise called Photodocument, which is not for profit, which has been going since 2012. And when I was already in Brighton. I've been here about 22 years or something when I launched it, and I soon realised that there was, I couldn't actually situate it within a space, which was a big frustration. And so I set up a kind of a model for putting our exhibitions in public spaces. So we had exhibitions all over the city, along the seafront. I think we were one of the first to put the big towers on the seafront, fill them with stones, and put work all the way around. In the train station, in our football stadium, we had literally 10 exhibitions around the city. We were doing a project on sustainability. And although it was great, because actually our remit in that organisation is very much to kind of, democratise and make sure art is accessible to everybody. So we wanted people to very much bump into the work rather than it being in the kind of the preserve of galleries or glass cases, etc. So it did smash that model, and that I was very pleased about that. But also it's expensive, and it's very challenging because you've got to think about weather and all sorts of things, and insurances and liabilities, and so it's difficult for a small arts organisation to pull that kind of thing off regularly. Although these days actually there's a lot more art in public spaces, which I'm really really pleased about. But there wasn't so much when I started. And then I suppose over the years we've got, sort of as that organisation evolved, I, more and more wanted a gallery space. And actually it was during the pandemic that we got some recovery money from the Arts Council. And one of the things that I was envisaging for when we came out of the pandemic, of course, nobody knew how long that was going to last, was to set up a gallery. So we put together a whole kind of vision design document to imagine what that would be. And then, of course, doors closed, and then they opened, and then they closed, and then they opened. And it was the most frustrating thing. I thought, this is never going to work now. And because I run a couple of different organisations, I got kind of sidelined into doing a book for a photographer whose work I represent. And that was a good use of lockdown time because I didn't have to worry about doors closing. And it was just, archiving negatives, 20th century negatives, and editing a book, working with a publisher. It was a brilliant use of lockdown, actually, beyond this, project that we'd envisaged. And then I got kind of, sidetracked into a lot of other things between then and now. And then over the last year or so, have felt increasingly this desperate need to have a space, and to have somewhere to collaborate. The more people I spoke to, more artists in the city, photographers particularly, everyone was just expressing huge amounts of frustration, of isolation, social, mental, professional isolation. People were resource guarding. There's that goes on as well. When people feel times are hard, people get more kind of like, oh, I need to keep this for me. There's not enough to go around. And there hasn't been enough to go around because the arts have been really squeezed for, a couple of decades now. So people have really felt that in terms of their own practice. But then that silo working is not very good for your health or for your practice because you don't evolve. So just having lots of conversations, and I started revisiting the idea, personally, and looking into spaces, talking to people. And then, Simon and I have hovered around each other's work for nigh on 20 years, and actually have done quite a few ventures together. We're involved in quite a lot of projects over the years together, and we're friends, of course. So, I started talking to him about that. We generally know what's going on in each other's lives. And he said, well, I've been thinking the same thing. And, completely independently had been looking at setting up some kind of, gallery / collaborative studio complex. And actually a space became available literally above his head where he's sitting now. And so we started looking at that and thinking, well, maybe this is something that we can do together, because we were both feeling that loneliness. Even though, I work as a photographer, but I also run a couple of organisations, and even that's lonely. We come together with people when there's live projects, but because you're not in a space with somebody, you don't have that kind of happenstance, spontaneous sort of like kind of feeling of, oh yeah, this can really evolve. It's, when you're working with emails and websites and phone and etc., it's not the same as actually feeling someone's energy and feeling that sense of spark in person. And then we just sparked off each other, really, and devised this.
Yeah, I mean the whole point of this podcast when I first started it, goodness knows how many years ago now, I think about 350 odd episodes, was actually to be an arm around the shoulder because I started to recognize that a lot of people were feeling quite lonely, and that was way before um, COVID. So I get that, but it's also interesting, I think, that a good few years ago now, but photographer Jim Stevenson set up mini clicks, which used to occur in Brighton and was a meeting every month and a talk. Um, so Brighton's got a good history for that kind of thing. But Simon, why do you think it's so important that there's that physical space for meeting? Because I think increasingly now, photographers are seeing digital communication as being the way forward. So, what's so important to you about the physical?
Well, I guess actually just circling back a bit there. I mean, you're right. Jim and MiniClick, created something very valuable at the time. There's a lot of people getting involved and enjoying the sense of community. And of course, that had built on um, photo works, with back in the day with Gordon and David Chandler, starting the magazine and the biennial, and then of course photo works and the fringe. So there's always been this kind of richness about photography in the city. But of course, it goes through waves, and those waves depend on funding, and they depend on locations, and they depend on individuals. And at some stage, those individuals get exhausted, and there's only so many resources. And so it gets every so often you need somebody else to take up the mantle again. And I think Nina and I were at that position where we thought, we watched so many kind of galleries and institutions closing, like Onca and Fabrica and CCA at Brighton Uni. And it was just a bit like, oh my God, there needs to be something that fills this. And why? Why do we actually need to meet? And I think it's because, well, partly what Nina was saying about sharing of information and actually just that sense that we can work on things together. But also, one of the things I realized is that actually sharing of resources is really important. So there is a new generation who can't afford the equipment. They can't afford, a scanner and necessarily keeping their own studio, photographic studio. The advertising work is very few and far between. Arts Council funding is very difficult. So if we can provide some of these facilities in-house, which enables the artist to be much freer in terms of not necessarily having to own all this stuff, that actually, we can provide it and we can help tutor and be a space where we can provide education, but access to a darkroom, but also high-end digital. And then there's much more of a mutual beneficial aspect to this than feeling like you need to buy into everything yourself.
Well, there was a real spirit for that in the 1970s. There were a lot of that feeling of collaborative coming together, and camera work came from that, and all sorts of other things. So I wonder if we're in a time now where people are starting to realize that that's important again.
Well, yeah, and that kind of idea of the bartering system in the sense that, we all have skills. Maybe we can share those skills. So we don't necessarily, I mean, I guess if we were to go down the capitalist metaphors, we could talk about the subscription model. Nothing's about ownership anymore. It's all about, you don't own a car. You'll just pick up a car on the street. You don't own a flat. You rent a flat. Everything's. But I do think there can be a positive thing about that, and that is a sense that you don't necessarily have to take on all the kind of stress and burden yourself. And actually, let's kind of share things together. If I can do that and you can do that, let's swap skills. And that's really something that we want to be able to do. um, and you talked about digital. I think digital is important and people are sharing digitally, but more and more they want the tactility of a workshop. They want to get their hands dirty. They want to create something. I think the next generation, the digital native generation, will want to go in a dark room and make a print. They'll want You
You
know,
know that that's something that I speak out about all the time.
yeah, and it's born out of a kind of a reality. We've just got a new lab that's opened in Brighton called Chemistry, and it's just a young guy that's decided to open a C41 lab, and he's inundated with film, and that's really exciting. And so if we can support him and he can support us, it seems to me to be a really good thing. Um, and I guess traditionally, the problem with Brighton is that the council have always considered Brighton to be a festival city. So every month there's a festival happening, whether that be film, digital, the main Fringe festival. And so they never considered a physical building being important. So what that meant was they just watched as the Towner was built and Turner Contemporary and Bexhill and we never did anything. And of course now it's got to the point where it's very difficult to get landlords to part with anything. They're all owned by, I don't know, Legal and General Pension Scheme, and trying to find out who owns an empty building is nigh on impossible. And even if you do, they won't give it to you, even though it's just empty. So I think a physical space is still important. Um,
But
and this is what
you
we
raise,
want.
yeah, you raised a good point there though, because I know that Jim with mini clicks, it was particularly it became a big commitment as things went on and as it grew and it grew. And that does tend to happen. It happened with Photo Fringe in Brighton, it happens elsewhere when I've been a trustee of a new festival, it always lasts a couple of years and then it falls apart because people realize how difficult it is. And I'm not being kind of a devil's advocate here, but you two have really put yourselves out there to do this. So, a lot of people who might be listening to this podcast be thinking, I'd like to do that, but it seems like a lot of hard work.
Nina?
Well, yeah, don't get us wrong. It's a lot of hard work, that's for sure. There's no getting away from that. I mean, we've been working around the clock, Simon and I, for the last 9 months while juggling all our other commitments as well. So yeah, not easy at all. But when you believe in something and the synergies there, it just kind of all comes together in a way that feels right. And what we've done as well is we've involved lots of different people. It hasn't just been about Simon and I, sitting in a dark room, kind of trying to imagine something that may never happen. We've actually got a much wider group that we're working with for ideas, for partnerships, to try to do it in such a way that's actually fit for now, not sort of harking back to, okay, you might say with the darkroom and everything, we are harking back in a way, but that's a good thing. There are young photographers wanting to use a darkroom and there is a revival. So we should absolutely catch that wave and provide those facilities. But
I'm sorry, but I'm still going to argue with you about this
okay.
revival in analog because
Okay.
I'm totally against it, but never mind.
Okay.
I'm completely and utterly against it.
It's happening anyway. It's happening anyway.
Well, anyway, let's not go down that road. Just listen to anyway. I've spoken about it.
But it's kind of beyond that. It's looking at something that yes, it is Simon and I at the heart of it, and we are spearheading it and putting our energy in. Yes, putting ourselves on the line. But because we're involving other people and we're bringing in other organisations, there's a lot of energy there. There's a lot of support, and because we're setting up a collaboration model, I think it means that there's going to be it's going to be an ecosystem. There's going to be a lot of mutual beneficial partnerships in place, even with our members.
But you guys are going to have to be the people who actually run it and make it happen.
Yeah. We're the bottom line is that if it fails, it's our finances that get squashed. But I think I guess what we see it as a scheme that can work financially. And I think if you consider this to be some form of charitable endeavor where we're not getting remunerated for our time, then it will fail. And only in the sense that it can only last as long as we have the energy for it to last. And so we have conceived of it as something that can be financially stable. And I think that has to be a reality, because if it's not, then you're failing everybody else, because you're failing those people that you're trying to provide a service to. So we've thought very hard about the ways that we can make this a model which can be financially stable and doesn't rely on purely on grants and goodwill. Now we've started the Kickstarter, and yes, that is about goodwill, and it is about, that's a kind of one-off buy-in, if you like, from a wider audience. But the great thing about a Kickstarter is it also gives you a sense of who's interested, who is your audience, what is it's it's marketing an idea. And so for us, that's as important. We're talking to you because you've seen the Kickstarter, so that's but longer term, it really does have to wash its own face. It can't be something that we just because neither of us are sitting on a pension fund or a nice kind of kickback.
But that is really interesting, though, because I think one of the areas where most creatives go wrong is that they're not very good business people. And that actual business thinking from the beginning is the difference between sort of rushing into it with a whole load of enthusiasm and a huge expectation, which then, you've got to then try and keep going and things invariably fall apart. Or going into it in a very professional way. Because I do think that there will be, and we have listeners all around the world, from Australia to America to wherever, and everyone in a town is going to know a few people who might want to come together to talk about photography, look at photography books. Whether they have a darkroom or not is a mute point. However, that actual physical connection of community is just so important. So what was it that made you think this has to work as a business? Who put on the anchors and went, well, hang on a minute, this just can't work through hope and, enthusiasm?
Well, because it has to have that trading success, doesn't it? I mean, you have to have hope and enthusiasm as well, and vision, and and strategy, and all the rest of it. But if it's not going to trade successfully, it's not going to work. We live in the climate that we live in, where materials cost X amount of money, where rent is X amount of money. We can't extricate ourselves from that type of capitalism that we are now completely wedded to in our society. So we have to work within it. And yes, we can, plead for slightly cheaper rents from the council or a bit of a rent-free period, and we can bring in friends and co-creators to offer some volunteer time or low cost, because even whether we're a regular company, we do see ourselves as a social enterprise, so people do want to get on board. We can call on community members to pick up a paintbrush, and there's all those kind of things that are sort of about sharing capacity, sharing resources, sharing time, which is all part of the model. But at the end of the day, it is Simon and I that have got to take the buck. So we have to make sure that our spreadsheets add up, and we have had accountants look at them for that very reason, and to make sure that the income is there for it to be sustainable and for it to grow.
Next thing you know, you'll be telling me that you know how to use Excel, and the whole thing will go horribly wrong.
Funnily enough.
But it is interesting, isn't it, that what you're describing, it does exist in other areas. I mean, I know something near where I live is a food-related thing called the Long Table, where you can go in, you can have a meal, and you just contribute. And there's a guy there who does bicycles, and that whole thing comes together. But the arts doesn't seem to have been very good at that in the UK.
No, and I absolutely agree with you, and that's why we're doing it. And we and I think it's because of this kind of silo mentality, kind of artistic individualism. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think we need to come together. And I think there's another. You can still have your individual artwork, absolutely, but I think there's different ways of doing it, and there can also be collaborative artworks as well. So I think people have a fear of it. Because it hasn't been invested in properly, and it hasn't been at the forefront of visibility within our society. But people need visceral connection. They really need that. We are pack animals as well. It goes back to our evolutionary biology. We are naturally creative. We naturally want to be together, and so therefore we thrive in those environments. And no wonder people, particularly in the winter, I know it's worse, but no wonder people have all kinds of sort of depressive illnesses going on, because when we're silo and separated from each other in that kind of wider connection, I think all our anxieties start to settle in, and then we're not our best selves, we don't make the best work, we don't feel like maybe doing the marketing that we need to do or being visible, because we're not feeling good in ourselves. So I think it can counter those kind of issues on so many different levels.
Do you feel also, I mean, I know you launched your Kickstarter just at a time when two photographers that you, Simon, and I know very well, Mark Wilson and Jim Mortram, launched their Kickstarters at a similar time. And there's been fantastic kind of mutual support between you online. And there is that independent network that exists within the UK and with other countries, where we do all support each other. And I always try and mention things, and Jim will be on the podcast at some point. But it does seem to then get quite regionalized, in that for a while there was lots of really good stuff going on in Wales, and now that seems to have gone a bit quiet. There was stuff happening in Scotland, but that's now gone a bit quiet. Do you think that there's a place here also for this to be on a more national kind of basis?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I guess I should start by saying I don't think we're the only people doing this. I mean, we've looked at other case studies. There's a place called in Bexhill called Flatlands. There's St. Anne's in Bristol. There's a kind of great kind of movement um, in Great Yarmouth where they've taken on the old Primark and they've turned it into artist studios and a gallery. So I definitely think there are these kind of grassroots things happening. Now, you're right, there isn't necessarily anything that ties those together nationally, and that's maybe something that we could, that may be something that needs to be looked at in a bigger way. Is that actually how can we create a network of these smaller entities and try and somehow build bigger conversations, but in the sense as much to be a kind of lobbying force against the government, with the government, in the similar way that we've seen, I guess, Dax and some other and artists do in terms of AI, and actually try and become a national voice. Interestingly, of course, we did see a national movement in terms of Matthew Burrows's artist support pledge during COVID, which was this kind of incredible moment where artists were supporting other artists during COVID by buying and selling each other's work. Pledging to buy. I don't know if you ever saw it, but it was basically if you bought 5 works, you then agreed to buy to sell. Yeah, if you sold a work, you also then had to buy a work, and so it was just this really interesting system. Now, of course, people can argue and say, okay, yet again, it's just artists supporting themselves. It's photographers buying photographers' books. Is that the only way it can survive? And I think it's an important way, but there are also ways of being able to step outside of that. And I do think we have to be brave enough to recognize that we can't do it within our own kind of ecosystem. There has to be buy-in from uh, other entities, whether that be arts organizations, commercial entities, or local councils, which is very tough at the moment, but I don't think it's impossible.
No, but also it raises the dreaded word of gatekeeper, which certainly I think photography over the years, perhaps I will suggest, has not been as well supported at grassroots level as it could have been by some of the larger organizations. And that
Yeah.
idea that, and I suppose in a way I said, you're taking control. And I do think that's kind of what I've been hoping for the last goodness knows how many, I don't know, 15 odd years or so that I've been having this conversation with people, that at some point there needs to be a coming together. And I think what Martin Parr does with Bob has an element of that.
Mm,
But of course, it's only once a year. So I suppose in a way, maybe I'm going to make a suggestion. Maybe you need to write a manifesto and hand it out to people so that those kind of 1960s, 70s yippies things where you say, right, this is how you do it. Here are the 10 steps. Because I'm sure that people listening to this will want to do what you're doing, but
mm,
wouldn't have a clue where to start. But both
mm.
you guys are much more experienced and knowledgeable as to how to do it.
I mean, we are seeing this as a test case study for something that could be, if not rolled out, at least suggested to other people about how it can work. Um, and so, yeah, we do want to share knowledge, if you like, and actually try and suggest a new way forward.
So it could kind of be
or
replicated.
reinvention of the wheel.
Well, it's a bit like a kind of Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise. You know, what you do is people go out there and do their own version because we've lost photo festivals now. You know, that they've gone. And I don't think there's any sign of them coming back. And I have had the conversation, as you quite rightly said, Simon, about, you know, when I've been at Bob, everybody there is everybody. It's like a kind of an annual meetup of everybody who knows everybody.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
and and the real key, I think the big challenge is how do you actually get photography out to people who aren't interested in photography?
Mm.
Mm. And that's actually part of our model, to be honest. What we've sort of written into, I suppose, our own manifesto is to try to involve and include as many kind of local residents as possible and visitors to the city, so that yes, it is a place for artists, led by artists, but we also want to run, you know, a teaching program, and yet that will be for professional artists, that will be for students, but it will also be for, you know, kind of lay people that just want to understand more about photography. So there'll be kind of beginner levels. And we've also envisaged um, setting up these, what we're calling creative solutions labs, where we actually look at some of our local problems. They may be problems that are actually kind of all over the country, or indeed further, you know, whether it's homelessness or looking at species loss, biodiversity loss, etc., and bringing together kind of cross-sector partners and local residents and artists, and using the arts to actually think, how can we solve some of these problems that are here? So I think we're trying to open our doors to as many people as possible. At least that's the vision.
Yeah. Good coffee, I usually find,
Good coffee.
and cake seems to be the way that everybody gets people into art galleries nowadays.
Absolutely.
And don't forget, you need a tote bag. That seems to be the other.
Tote bag and a t-shirt.
Yeah, and a t-shirt, of course. So uh, at this point, it's a fine line, isn't it, when you're going to set something up like this between becoming business people and remaining as creatives?
Yeah. Personally, I've been treading that line for quite a long time because I've been involved in other organizations. So it's not that unusual for me. And I think, you know, the business process itself is creative and enjoyable and interesting and collaborative. But yeah, it does have a toll to some extent on your own practice. And it definitely has in my case. But at the same time, I think creating somewhere where people will come together for the benefit of their own practice will inspire all of us, including Simon and I. So I think we will get our own benefits from it as artists as well.
So for a lot of photographers struggling as to their mental health, or perhaps the phone isn't ringing as much as it used to ring, or the funding isn't there, it could well be a way of actually sort of expanding or evolving their engagement with the medium.
I hope so. Yeah.
Definitely.
You know, by setting up their own place,
Mm.
they could actually try and. I mean, I do hear a lot of people saying to me, I sound like a kind of a psychiatrist's couch, but okay, it is like that sometimes. That they've lost their love for it. Or, as we all know, a lot of photographers get quite angry with the industry because it's not as it was.
I mean, I think one of the ways I've been relatively successful in my career, not saying I'm very successful, just relatively successful, is by being nimble. And I've never been frightened about what's about to come. So I remember, starting out in magazines and then realizing quickly that actually magazines were not going to be what they were. And then I, started looking at kind of working within photography books, and then saw kind of the internet, how that was going to change everything. So I've always kind of just shifted the way that I worked to be able to keep making the work I'm interested in making, but the way that I do it has to somehow change. And I'm totally aware that things are about to change enormously again, and it's a case of how we adapt to that. And of course, what's difficult about now is that we can't actually see what the future is going to look like, even the near future, because it's changing so fast with AI. but I think we can embrace it and we can somehow kind of work with it. I mean, in terms of my own creativity, I've spent 25 years coming up with ideas. And to be honest, I'm quite tired of coming up with ideas for my own work. And I'd be quite happy to sit in an office or an open plan office and look out at a bunch of other creators making work. And that at the moment would really excite me, is actually seeing others being motivated to create. My kids are grown, are slightly older now, so I don't have the same kind of pressures that I did to be continually, selling work. And so I kind of feel a little bit more that this is the right time to be doing this. As much as I wanted to go to every mini click talk, I ended up, putting a baby to bed or whatever. So yeah, do you know what I mean? So things change, your own kind of circumstances change, um and yeah, I guess in terms of my own practice, this in its way is its own, as Nina was saying, has its own creativity. And to be honest, I'm going to be working till I'm late 70s, given my paltry pension scheme. So, I might as well uh, take it steady for a while in terms of my own practice.
Well, the fact that you think you're going to take it steady really does raise a number of concerns. Um,
Well, that's why I'm in partnership with Nina. I mean, you should see her go. My word. Woman can juggle more plates than a juggler.
well, that's what's great, and maybe that's something that comes out of people listening to this who like the idea of it, is actually find people, like-minded souls that you could actually do it with, and don't feel that you have to do it all on your own. Because once again, the whole thing of photography is quite, or can be quite, a solitary kind of practice, and collaboration is good for us as people.
It's really good. And also, I think, that kind of sense of peer-to-peer learning, we'd like to have those kind of peer-to-peer sessions actually where we bring creatives together, almost in quite a kind of a formal mechanism. I graduated from the School for Social Entrepreneurs many years ago because I'm obviously very interested in that. And we used to have these, what we called action learning sets, where we'd all sit round as lonely social entrepreneurs and like have 45 minutes each to talk about all the issues. And we'd be in a group of maybe 4 or 5, and everyone else would be focusing on us for those 45 minutes and trying to ask intelligent questions, provocative questions, and also offer some kind of solution. So you can transfer that to the arts. It's already happening. But, so that you could have those sort of facilitator sessions where photographers, filmmakers come together and solve each other's problems and help. And that, that helps again to sort of counter that silo working and gives people more confidence and belief in their own work.
Yeah, because
it's really important.
I think one of the things perhaps which I'm so impressed by what you're doing is, I actually don't think it's got an awful lot to do with photography. It kind of has an awful lot to do with the person, and then the photography is the outcome from that situation.
Do you know what? You're absolutely right. I think what we're trying to envisage is something a little bit more kind of holistic and interconnected, and that serves the human being as well as the practice. And I think that's
Practice comes from that, doesn't it? I mean,
practice
without
comes
that,
from that. Absolutely, it evolves from that, and it nurtures. It nurtures the practice, and the practice nurtures the human being, etc. And we all nurture each other. So there is a kind of a background ecosystem that we've devised, using One Planet. I don't know if you're aware with oneplanet.com. It's a company that is offering us their technology, so we're in partnership with them. It's a kind of a mind map. It's brilliant. It's to get away from kind of linear, very left brain thinking. It's opening up that right brain that we all know is much more healthy, and kind of creates that overview where you can zoom out and think. It's actually been proven that when you're in your right brain mode, you are much more likely to come up with creative solutions to problems anyway. And that's not an outdated sort of theme. If you listen to the work of Dr. Ian McGilchrist, who's one of the most eminent British philosophers, and who has absolutely, intricately studied the right hemisphere of the brain, you'll learn more about that. And it's so that kind of mind mapping, oneplanet.com technology is enabling us to collaborate, to strategize, and to see things and how everything interlinks with their technology. So that will really also help us to work beyond our, kind of spreadsheets
Yeah.
or little pockets of work, or, getting locked in your own brain.
Well, that's it, isn't it? And it's all about getting out of those silos that
Yeah.
either we put ourselves into, or photography has a great love of putting labels on people and
Yes.
saying you are this or you are that, which is so so terrible, terrible. Anyway, um, so the plan is that you're going to raise this money. You're going to start decorating. So you're going to move from spreadsheets to emulsion, um, and then open the doors. And then how will it actually run? Or have you not thought about that yet?
Run. Oh, god damn, right. Yeah, I mean, the main thing is going to be based on a membership scheme. So rather than it just being kind of fixed places, the idea is that you can buy into different levels of access depending on what you need, So you can have, just a desk, or you can have desk and access to the photographic studio. You could get access to the darkroom. You can get discounts on workshops we were going to run. So the idea is to try and have as a kind of wider range of buy-ins as possible. So we're not in a place where students, for instance, can't afford to kind of come and browse through our library, or get access to a talk, but at the same time, if kind of higher end artists can afford to have a studio there. So we want to be able to have kind of a different range of offers. But education is going to be a big thing. We want to be running a lot of workshops. We want to be bringing in outside partners to run workshops. So, for instance, the Nikon school wants to, run some workshops through here, so they, are able to kind of reach out to and the next generation of photographers, if you like. And then we've got Intrepid Camera, which is a camera. They make handmade 4x5 cameras. And they're based in Brighton, and they want to
Always
run
looking to the
workshops.
future, Simon.
Yeah, honestly, you'd be amazed how many 5.4 cameras they sell every year. Handmade 5.4 cameras.
Mandolins and lutes and
And
harpsichords, they do the lot.
do you buy records, by the way?
No.
Oh, you see, so there's a lot of people that buy records.
No, I know there is.
Yeah, we're going to have a record player.
Um, and then, we've got PhotoWorks are going to be taking on an office space with us, which is great, because there we then are able to kind of collaborate on some bigger projects and have a bit more kind of a reach. And then, we're going to be, want to be running exhibitions. I guess the thing is we don't consider ourselves to be a big white wall gallery that's going to be open permanently. It's very much actually utilizing the space as best we can, so that we can have multi-purpose use. So a gallery can be a gallery one day, but it can be a photographic studio the next day, so that we're able, we're not cutting ourselves off from any potential revenue stream to make it work. And so I guess that, in terms of how we start out, slowly would be the main thing. I mean, we've got this amazing, great open space, which we could quite quickly fill with walls, but that we don't want to do. So we're going to be making it as everything as temporary as possible. So over time, we can start working with actually what the needs really are, and hopefully over time really perfect what it is that we do and what people are actually wanting. Um,
And one of the key things I think is that if we've all been involved in photography and the arts for a long time, and we've seen things come and we've seen things go, and invariably, from my experience, the things which have actually had the biggest impact have been solo people just doing it on passion, like you guys are doing it. And then you've got other people who have relied upon Arts Council funding or other funding, and that always starts off okay and then kind of dwindles to nothing,
yeah,
because they're reliant upon a charity. And then, of course, the other one is the big ones like the RPS and so forth, who in themselves have got huge financial difficulties. So from those kind of areas, we have kind of if you like, the arts world as the kind of contemporary art practice world, which does tend to look a lot towards funding of various kinds and bursaries. Then we've got commercial photography, commissioned photography, which is very used to going out there and finding work. And then, of course, you've got the old school camera club and the RPS. Now, is it your intention to try and appeal to all three of those kind of very separate kind of communities?
I mean, I think so. They are separate, but people have a lot to learn from each other. And I've had a few interactions with the different camera clubs in the southeast, been invited to give talks, etc. And it's some camera clubs do tend to attract certain kinds of people, and very interested in kit, and not to be demeaning to anybody. And I remember when Click, when I was talking to Jim, I know Jim quite well. He was always about, we are not about kit and cameras. That was very much about, we're about ideas and creativity, etc. But the two can meet. And I did find people in the camera clubs that were really creative and interested in ideas, and some that were more talking about their lenses, and both. There's a place for both, actually, because some people use their lenses to work in a certain way and want to create a certain effect. So I don't think there needs to be the separation necessarily.
It's so good to hear that, to be honest, because I think that is what we need. I think we need that much more kind of democratic approach to it. And of course, Brighton's got a couple of universities, and a few people teaching photography down there. So, are you getting any help or support from the local university?
I mean, definitely, we're already in contact with several of the lecturers, quite well known, Fergus Harron and Julia Winkler and Stephen Bull, etc. There's a wonderful senior technician at University of Brighton who's been there, I think, decades, called Simon Sandis, and he wants to run some sustainable darkroom techniques using kind of homegrown materials like rosemary and mint.
Oh, how very Brighton.
How very Brighton.
You can then drink them afterwards.
Yeah.
Well, no, you'd have to sell them in the North Lanes in a cup made from a petal.
Yeah.
But it's a real issue, isn't it, actually? We do have to think about those kind of things. We do, we are a social enterprise, and thinking about how we do things sustainably in terms of the materials we use and how we get rid of chemical waste from the darkroom is actually really important. So we do encourage Simon Sandis's sustainable darkroom technique workshops too.
Simon, you were going to say.
I was going to say, but there's also some very big colleges here, Basvic, Varndine, thousands of students studying the arts. And so, yeah, we're in touch with them. And, the problem is a lot of these education outfits don't have the money to invite visiting lecturers anymore. I spent years traveling around all the British universities giving talks. And now, there's rarely any money, to invite anybody. So, and also their libraries are diminishing. We've already building up quite an extensive library of people who are donating books and publishers that are giving us books, so we can create something that people can come and can access. And again, that's very much inspired by Martin and the incredible stuff that he's done at the foundation in Bristol, and how that's really supporting British photography and beyond. I mean, we don't see ourselves, although we're very much rooted locally, and we do think that's important. We don't see ourselves as purely a local establishment. So we want to be getting, international artists to come and, either have a residency here or present work. So, we do want to mix both. And I think longer term, we don't just see ourselves as a physical space. We see ourselves as a digital space. And, we will be providing a form of digital membership with access to additional services that will be done as part of our model of thinking, how can we make this thing survive?
Well, listen, this all sounds incredibly exciting. I do think that you're taking control, and I think you might even be taking over the world. But I don't think you quite realize it yet, or perhaps are not yet willing to admit it.
I've got a question for you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question for you. Yeah. What's going to go wrong? what haven't we thought about? That's always the question, is that what are the uh, unknown unknowns?
I would say, having run a gallery book space, exhibition space in Brighton, the one main thing that went wrong is you've got to find somebody who's there all the time, who you can trust.
Hmm.
And I always had to be there. And so I was giving up a lot of my time to just sitting or, just being available. I think that's really difficult.
Hmm.
I think also, and if you speak to anybody who runs a shop, a pub, or anything, it's always difficult to ensure that things aren't disappearing, that things aren't getting broken. Um, just those everyday, boring things.
Practicalities.
Yeah, a friend of mine who owned a restaurant chain always used to say to me, it's all about the serviettes. Everyone takes more than they need, but every time they take one, I lose money. And that's what that would be my humble
Yeah,
suggestion is think about the serviettes and the toilet roll and the
yeah.
plumbing and the electrics.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, we're getting quite deep into all of that, the
we
Yeah,
fire
are.
extinguishers and the public liability, and
yeah,
it's not all
exactly.
glamour, I can tell you.
No,
No,
no. But anyway, that's me being slightly uh, pessimistic, or at least what I refer to as realistic optimism.
yeah,
But listen, I wish you a lot of luck with it. I think it's great. I look forward to popping in at some
Yeah.
point
absolutely. You're very welcome.
because I haven't been in Brighton for a while and I need to come and visit. So
You have to
look,
come with a paintbrush.
yeah, but don't. I'm not going anywhere near that dark room or any of this ridiculous analog nonsense.
You'll be graffitiing the darkroom by the sounds
I
of it.
will be. I will be down with analog. Um, have a great time. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for joining us, and maybe we'll catch up again in a year's time, and we'll find out how it's all going.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having us.